I have a little exercise for you today. It's not going to be difficult. I want you to think about the most successful person that you know. Now, I want it to be someone that you are at least acquainted with. Doesn't have to be a best friend or something like that. But don't make it a celebrity or a movie star or anything like that. Somebody you're personally acquainted with. Who is the most successful person that you know? You know, this question came to my mind as I thought about a conversation I had with my personal development coach this week. In our session, my coach asked me the question, if you were invited to speak to a group of fifth graders and you were asked to talk about the subject of success, how would you, in simple terms that they could understand, define success? And I just thought that that was a very interesting question for a number of reasons, so let's talk about it. One of the most interesting things I thought about that question is when my coach asked it to me, I very quickly came to the realization that after 2 years of personal development, of being on this personal development journey, trying to live the more intentional life, trying to become the best possible version of myself, after all that time, I had never actually stopped to define what success looks like for me. And you know, I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that most people have this vague idea or this sense that I can recognize success when I see it, or I can recognize when somebody's not successful. So we have this vague idea of it, but the problem is if you've never defined success for yourself, then most likely you have, just by exposure, gotten your idea of success from somewhere else, from either what the world says is successful or maybe what your parents exemplified to you, what they thought was successful. But if you've never defined it for yourself, you might have a vague idea of what is success and what is not, but it's most likely coming from somewhere else. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why you hear so many stories about people who have made a lot of money and they got the houses and they got the cars and they took all the trips. You hear about these people who kind of reach the top, what the world would say is successful, and yet they talk about how they're not happy, that it feels all empty. And, you know, people who haven't reached that, they kind of look at them and be like, man, you're just so ungrateful. I don't necessarily think it's the fact that they're ungrateful. I think it's the fact that they never defined success for themselves. They took the idea that the world or somebody else kind of implanted in their mind was successful, and they thought, when I reach that, I'll be happy, I'll be fulfilled. But because it was somebody else's idea of success, once they reached it, they realized they weren't fulfilled because they were going after somebody else's idea of success instead of having defined it for themselves. Now, going back to that question of who is the most successful person that you know, I want you to think about what is it about that person or that person's life that caused them to come into your mind when you thought about the most successful person you know. You know, if you can look at that question and you can identify these are the characteristics I see in that person that was the reason I consider them the most successful, then by definition, that is your current idea or your thoughts on what is a success. You know, I think a lot of people, if asked that question, may have thought about the first person that popped in their head that had the most money. Because that's a very common idea of success. But my question to you is that your idea of success? You know, because again, if you haven't defined it for yourself, then most likely you've taken on somebody else's idea of success. You know, thinking about this question beyond my conversation with my coach, one of the things that I realized and that I identified is, as a Christian, as a believer, one of the most important things in my life is to believe that I am doing what God has called me to do, that I am in the will of God. And so that has to be a part of my definition for success. For example, if I grew this YouTube channel to be the biggest personal development channel on YouTube, what if I grew this channel to 10 million subscribers, and yet the Lord never told me to even start a YouTube channel, that He wanted me doing something completely different? Well, then if I'm not doing the will of God, then for me, I cannot consider myself a success. And so that might not be a consideration for you. Maybe you don't believe in God. Maybe you don't have those beliefs that I do. But again, that's why it's so important that we actually sit and define what is success for us. Because one of the things is, if you don't have a definition of success, how are you ever going to know that you've attained it, that you are being successful? Again, if your idea of success comes from somebody else, you might attain that thing, but it might seem very hollow. And so when I had this conversation with my coach, I was able to provide an answer. I gave some things that, looking back, I think some of them were very valid points of success. But even beyond that conversation, I've just determined I have to come up with my own definition of success. Now, I've thought about it since then. My idea is beginning to grow, but I'm not 100% there yet. So I just thought this was a worthy conversation to have. I think it's important that every person develop in themselves a definition of success so that you have something to reach toward. Obviously, this is going to be very vital in the quest to live the more intentional life and become the best possible version of yourself. Those two very much come together and are very much intertwined. And so if you've thought about this, if you have sat down and defined what success is to you, why don't you go ahead and leave a comment down there? Maybe your definition of success will help others get on track to what success might mean to them. If you want to learn more about what it means to live the more intentional life, why don't you go ahead and click this playlist down here. But until I see you again, go out and live that more intentional life.